A woman in her 50s was killed by a brick thrown from the roof of an apartment building, but the crime went unpunished. In another case, a principal offender who kidnapped and murdered an elementary school student faces a lesser prison term than her accomplice, who only encouraged her. What can explain these unlikely results? Well, the brick was thrown by a 9-year-old, and the main culprit in the child murder case was a 17-year-old. Korea's Juvenile Act imposes lighter sentences on young offenders, even for violent crimes. But lately, it's been the subject of intense debate here. We will discuss why on this week's Upfront.
From the kidnapping and murder of an 8-year-old girl by 2 teenage girls in Incheon and the brutal assault of a 14-year-old girl by a group of middle school students in Busan, to the 7-hour gang attack on a 17-year-old girl by 6 teenagers in Gangneung. The recent spate of violent juvenile crimes has sparked a controversy over the country's juvenile law, which reduces sentences for crimes committed by minors. The current law provides that a person under 18 who has committed a crime punishable by the death penalty or life imprisonment shall be sentenced to 15 or 20 years in prison. Also, offenders aged 10 to 14 are exempt from criminal charges and ordered to perform community service or to be put on probation. Those under 10 are exempt from probation and do not face any punishment for their actions. While many Koreans see the need to repeal or revise the law, citing that mild punishment encourages crime, lawmakers have proposed a bill that would lower the age for criminal liability and raise a cap on juvenile sentencing. However, critics claim increased penalties are not the answer, adding they would leave teens branded for life and potentially turn them into repeat offenders. There is a growing trend around the world towards tougher punishment for violent juvenile offenders. Japan added a clause to its juvenile law in the year 2000, stating offenders aged 16 or older charged with murder shall be tried in criminal court. Under the revised law, an 18-year-old boy was sentenced to death for murdering 3 people. In the United States, teens convicted of violent crimes such as kidnapping or murder are sentenced to life without parole. On this week's Upfront, we hear different opinions on the controversial juvenile law and discuss the need for its revision.
For today's discussion, we're joined by 2 experts. Hwang Myung-jin, professor in the Department of Sociology at Korea University, and Lee Ji-soo, an attorney at law. Welcome.
Thank you for inviting me.
having me.
Now, juvenile crime is neither unique nor new to Korea. There had been discussions in the past about repealing or revising the law. Why do you think this issue is getting renewed attention these days?
I believe that statistically speaking, there's increases rate of the crimes and the contents and quality of these crimes are getting more serious and brutal, and that causes many people's cautions and worries, and sometimes it develops as aggravating the angers, that the people feel like the moral sentiment is getting damaged. This is what happened, I think, these days. The more problem is the ages of these criminals getting younger, and that causes another kinds of the worries that we must.
I think the main reason why this issue has emerged is because of the recent instance that we all witnessed, the murder case in Incheon, or brutal assault by many children towards other children, and as we all see these days, there has been a further use of SNS, and children's kids who were involved in those crimes sort of brag about what they did towards their peer group or their friends, and that upsets many people, and such issue has been emerged and bothered ordinary people. What they have wrote down or stated in those SNS or the Facebook is that You know, they perfectly know well that Juvenile Act exists in this country, and there are some sort of protections. So regardless of what they do or what of crimes that they commit, to a certain extent, they will be protected, and that disturbs ordinary people such as myself.
Yeah, and some teenagers know that they are protected under this Juvenile Act, so they'll get lighter punishment.
Right. The core issue of the whole thing is not like 10 years ago or 20 years ago when society as a whole needed to provide some sort of protections towards those young minors. I mean, their recognition of all these incidents have been matured compared to 10 or 20 years ago. The crux of the whole issue is, do we still need to protect those minors or juveniles? Well recognize what's going on, and that's, I think, the whole thing, the issues.
When we look at the recent incidents, there's been heavy media coverage as well. Do you think that has helped to bring the issue to the fore as well?
I'm sure it does. The media and SNS has played critical roles. But the thing is that there are, in reality, there are things happening. So getting more people exposed to this kind of incidents. It's sad, but we have to endure that. We have to admit it.
So under the current law, juvenile offenders are either exempted from punishment or there's a cap on the maximum penalty that can be imposed on them. Do you think the law needs to be changed?
The punishment-wise, the reaction is aimed at enhancing the punitive justice, and that doesn't really help anybody, especially victims. Perpetrator might get some reaction from the government and society, but does victim get is nothing. So in terms of the restorative justice, we have to make everything back before things happening. It happened. We have to understand that, but the consequences, the negative consequences might have to be erased, diminished, and somehow revoked, passed. So victims and victims' families and perpetrators and also whole societies might get damages. So we have to revoke this, and recover these damages, what we have to do. This is basic concept of the restorative justice. I'm very strong believe in that system.
Mr. Lee, what do you think? Do you think it's time to take another look at the Juvenile Act?
Before I discuss or touch upon that issue, I think we have to understand how the Korean Juvenile Act is drafted. I mean, it differentiates those minors or juveniles, those who fall into the age between 10 and 14. Many cases we've seen, their penalties are totally exempted because they fall under that category of ages. But if the perpetrator or the culprit above 14 but falls under the minor, which is under 20, their penalty will be lessened. The part that we're focusing is the former one, which is, which falls under the 10 and 14. And in order to understand why such law exists, not only in Korea but in many other jurisdictions, is because people think that those young people lacks, reasonable thoughts, or when someone commits crime. It is in the criminal law. It is required to prove both mens rea, state of mind, and the action, which ended up in a crime. But the problem is those children do not have enough state of mind of understanding what their thoughts may end up.
They may not know between the right and
wrong. They might not know exactly the consequences or the impact that such crime may bring to the society or to the victims. So that is the main reason why not only Korea but in many other jurisdictions provide certain protections against those minors. Now the issue is someone at the close whose age is close to 14. We need to raise the question: do they really lack mens rea, state of mind, when they commit such crimes? It used to be true in 20 years ago or 10 years ago because, at that age, we all went through that age, but, didn't understand, or lacked reasonableness in their way of thinking. But these days, there are so many informations that flow into even to those children at that age, and they know exactly, the consequences that will be brought along after they commit certain crimes.
You think children these days are more mature than
I'm
when
talking
we were
about
children?
those children who is close to the age of 14 or 13. I still believe that those younger ones, like those who fall into like 7 or 6 or 10, even 12, still do not have the proper state of mind to make the judgments, the right judgments. But those who get close to the borderline, like 14 or 13, I don't believe, thinking of seeing all these crimes that are happening recently, and they know exactly what's going to happen and the consequences of such crimes. And the question is, do we still need to provide certain protections to those people who have even more, heinous set of mind than the adults? So the whole, thing that we are experiencing these days, the people who wants to change such malfunction of the system is arguing. There are two groups. One, they want the total abolishment, or
right.
just
getting rid of the
get rid
law.
of the entire act. I'm against those arguments because still there are a group of children who need some legal protections. And then there are other groups who argue that we need to change the threshold. Lowering the age because, unlike 10 or 20 years ago, now children, both mentally and physically, are much more matured than the ones who lived a long time ago.
Isn't it also problematic, though, that criminal liability can either increase or decrease by age, not by the severity of the crime? Because that's exactly what's happening with some of these perpetrators.
Right.
Some of them are getting away with probation because they're a little younger.
Right. I think that also has to do something with the current issue, because the reality was that there was only a few months apart. Not even a year. But then the consequence, the penalties that they have to confront was so different. One was,
20
sentenced
years.
to 20 years.
Yeah, the 17-year-old.
Right. And then a bit older one had to, confront a lifetime sentence.
Yes.
And
when she didn't participate in the crime itself.
Well, actually, the fact of the matter is she also played an important role in the crime. But anyway, she, was deemed as an accomplice, but had to face even severe penalties. So that, after seeing that, people thought to themselves, is this right? Is this justice? Because the age difference between those two was less than a year.
Yes.
But the consequences, the penalties that they have to confront was so different.
Because they were on different sides of the threshold.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So people started raising questions. Is this a justice that we would like to, see in this society? And I think it makes perfect sense. It's about time to discuss whether, we need to change the age, lowering it, or do we need to amend certain provisions in the Act so that we can all feel like that the right justice is being served in our society.
Take other factors into account, for example. Well, what do you think, Professor Hwang?
I believe because of this aging society, people might get older, and they live longer, and lowering ages might be quite against this natural trend. The position that support just strengthening the punishment. There's no evidence that would work. Histories and researchers in many other countries, we made had in-depth studies and experimentation that that putting more penalty on this perpetrator might get shock effect. They're astonished, they got shocked. So if you lower the age cap, or the age and the cap, why don't we have the put more punishment to other people in general. It's got to be the same.
You mean stronger
vision.
penalties for adult criminals as well?
Right. Then who's going to agree with that? You know, it's out of the context, right? But the real important thing is the foundation of our society has been changing, and this approach has been done several years, at least discussed several years, and many people oppose it, and it's not happening because we are very strong that, you know, we believe that this, you know, new change system, you know, having more heavy penalty would not work.
Well, yeah, that's the question opponents of a legal revision are raising. Can tougher penalties actually lead to a reduction in juvenile offenses? We put that question to a criminal psychologist, so we'll hear what he has to say. But we also talked to some citizens about what they think about the possibility of a legal revision. Take a look.
우리가 살던 그 세대보다는 훨씬 더 정신적으로는 크지는 못했지만은 육체가 큰 거를 좀 착각하면서 그런 것들이 자기의 그 과시욕을 나타내는 것으로 생각돼서 제가 어른 세대가 볼 때는 아이들에 대한 그런 좀 경각심 아니면 아이들이 생각하고 있는 그 범죄에 대한 그 미흡한 그런 부분들을 법적으로서 약간은 조정을 해야 된다고 생각하고 있고
어린 게 그러니까 나이 어린 게 면죄부가 될 수는 없는 것 같고 살인이나 좀 이렇게 강력한 폭력 같은 거는 처벌이 좀 강화돼야 된다고 생각을 해요.
왜냐하면은 그때 그 당시하고 지금은 뭐 요즘 청소년들이 어떠한 그런 성장 발육 기간이라든가 그러한 모든 것들이 그때하고는 모든 면에서 안 맞는다고 생각을 합니다.
기본적으로 소년법상의 어떤 처벌 기준을 강화해서 소년 범죄를 줄이겠다는 생각은 이론적으로는 가능하지만 현실적으로는 효과가 없는 대책에 불과하고 가해 소년과 피해 소년의 어떤 그 심리적인 공감 훈련이나 또는 가해를 가한 소년이 피해자의 피해 내용에 대해서 충분히 인식을 하고 또한 피해를 당한 아이들이 정상적으로 회복할 수 있는 프로그램 이런 것들이 제공된다면 아무래도 종전보다는 더 많이 청소년 폭력을 줄일 수 있는 방법이 될 거라고 생각합니다.
I think what our expert, Professor Wong, said sounds similar to what you had to suggest a little earlier. What do you think?
I'm happy to, watch his video. Many people, especially in the frontliners and actors who have advocated juvenile justice and the children's criminals, they pretty much agree upon the same thing. The penalty, doesn't work. Put them education, make them learn how to love other people and how to make themselves sympathize. This system fails, doesn't work, not because of our law is not enough. Doesn't understand what's happening. More important thing is we have the more resources and people's attention. Not just attention, but people, money, and the alternative schools and education. And these things are pretty much lacking in our society. People may understand it, but they don't really feel that way.
Well, I think in an ideal world, what Professor Hwang said would work.
Well,
but in
I'm not arguing that simply changing the law or amending it can cure all the problems that we have. I'm just saying, arguing that it is a good start. And I agree that there must be something else done as a society as a whole in order to deal with this juvenile crimes. Yes, I agree. But we need to set apart those two issues. Yes, I agree. I can't agree more that a lot of resources must be put in order to deal with those juvenile crimes. But changing the law, I think it's a good start because those who are against the amendment or revision of the Juvenile Act seems to argue on behalf of those culprits or the criminals. But what about the victims' right? At the same age, the recent instance, the victims were a bit younger than the criminals, or about the same age, what about their rights? You know, that's why I'm arguing, you know, the justice needs to be served. And I'm not saying that changing the law would solve the entire problem. But still, you know, the recent thing that happened in Busan is a criminal assault. And those, you know, criminals will not serve in the jail term, but will return to the society or even back to the school, the space where they have to share with the victims.
Yeah.
And imagine from the victim's perspective, that would be a nightmare, you know, that he or she must confront, you know, who committed a felony or committed assault against him or her within 2 or 3 years. You know, that's a nightmare. So what I'm arguing is that if we lower the age, we're not punishing them even, I mean, severely. What we're doing is we're just lifting the protection that the law is providing to those minors, and then they will be subject to the regular criminal law.
It feels like Professor Hwang's suggestions are geared towards prevention and reconciliation between victims and perpetrators, whereas Mr. Lee's suggestions are geared towards finding justice for the victims. So if only we could find a balance between these two sides, right?
Well, I'm going to ask a question, both of you. These you know, perpetrators in Busan incident, others incident, aren't they got punished? They already got punished.
One was actually put on probation instead of
being detained. They have different types of punishment. They're in the system, legal system, that enforce them to restrict their rights. They can have time for regret. Different ages group and different types of people might have different treatment. That's how we agree upon this civilized society. So, you know, putting them in the same kinds of, same amount of penalty, you know, things that we cannot, that doesn't mean this system is unfair or system doesn't work. More important thing is how we see these people in different needs and different way of, you know, their fulfill the needs are being serviced. Victim, they might have different types of new needs that has to be met. And same thing as the perpetrator.
Well aware of the criminology statistics stating that severe penalties does not necessarily lead to the lesser crime. That is true. But then we also have to think about the deterrence effect. You know, once you have a severe penalties, you know, there some, you know, juveniles close to that age will recognize that, well, we can't behave, you know, like we want to, because we may have to confront a severe penalties once we commit crimes. And the recent instance, what bothers me most is that they seem to, you know, they were well aware that they will be protected by the law. And they sometimes brag about it, you know, with their peer group saying, well, you know, I will be protected anyway, so
we'll get out soon.
We'll get out soon. And that was quite disturbing, you know. So they are sort of abusing the system that we have. So, you know, it is about time that we need to take necessary measures and stop, you know, stop from them abusing such system. And what I'm arguing at this point is that I'm not saying that we need to totally abolish the whole system. Let's lower, in accordance with the maturity of those children at that age, because now they're mentally matured than 10 years or 20 years ago when the law was first enacted. First of all, do you know when this Juvenile Act was enacted in this country? It was 1958. Remember, those days, you know...
Times have changed.
Times have changed a lot. And both physical and the mental status of those children have changed a lot as well. So what I'm trying to say is we need to incorporate those changes into the law and so that the justice can be better served.
Well, you can see how it's difficult to come to a conclusion even on whether to revise or repeal the Juvenile Act. Well, one bad decision shouldn't mean the end of a teenager's life. At the same time, being underage shouldn't give him or her free rein either, which is why the discussion needs a little more time and effort on all of our parts instead of rushing to a hasty or emotional response. Well, thank you very much, Mr. Lee, Professor Hwang, for sharing your insights with us today.
It was my pleasure.
That's all for this week Upfront. We'll be back next week. Thanks for watching.